Okay. Oh, all those brilliant words lost. Okay. All right. So we were saying, so here the key is Rav, a Talmudic sage, says the mitzvot were given only in order that a person might be refined by them. All right. Another famous story before we get to some of these details of ethics and tzedakah and gimilut chasadim, which is another term we'll explain in a moment. Um, Famous story about Shammai and Hillel. Um, Shammai and Hillel were two of the great sages of their day. They lived in the first century of the Common Era. And the famous story is of a non-Jew who comes to Shammai, wants to become Jewish. And he says to Shammai, convert me on the condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I'm standing on one foot. And Shammai, at least in some of these stories, which I have to be fair, I think they were written by Hillelites. They make Shammai always out to be this really cantankerous curmudgeon. And we know from some of other Shammai's teachings that he was a pretty loving guy. But at least according to these stories, he's pretty nasty, or he has very short on temper. And so Shammai says, convert me while I'm standing on one foot. Like, what? That's ridiculous. Get out of here. He says, you're not serious. And he pushes him away. Um, and Shammai happened to be a builder by trade, so he beats him with a builder's cubit and kicks him out of his office. All right, same Talmud continues. The same non-Jew then goes to Hillel. And Hillel, he says, convert me while I'm standing on one foot. So Hillel immediately converts him. And then he says to him, oh, so what, but he's, convert me while I'm standing on one foot. Teach me the entire Torah. Sorry. Teach me the entire Torah while I'm standing on one foot. And Hillel says, okay, here's the entire Torah. That which is hateful to you, do not do to another. That's the entire Torah. Now, the rest of it is all interpretation. Now you have to go study. So the story obviously is that Hillel, much more patient, but his understanding but this is his understanding of the essence of Torah. What is hateful to you, what you don't want done to you, don't do to other people. Now that may sound familiar because another, probably a student of some of these rabbis, taught a different version of it. His was in the positive, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Hillel's version is a little more protective. So, in case you're a masochist, do unto others as you would have them do unto you isn't such a great philosophy. But it's similar ideas here that, you should care about what, when you should look within and what's important to you, and then make sure that you don't do that, or you treat other people the way you'd like to be treated. You don't treat them the way you don't want to be treated. And that's the essence. And then the rest of it is all interpretation. So these are this is basically an introduction to this notion of the importance of ethics in Jewish teachings. And again, and the reason why I sometimes bring up these alternative views is just to know that in Judaism, as I said at the very beginning, there is no such thing as Judaism, right? There's a lot of different understandings, versions, interpretations, and there are some who interpret, as I mentioned before, that ethics is one thing and halacha is another thing. And since halacha is divine, then we really don't have a problem. We don't have to really worry so much about ethical behavior, because when we're doing halacha properly, we're doing exactly what God expects of us and what we're supposed to do. That's one understanding, but that is certainly not the understanding of liberal Jewish groups, and I would say many Orthodox as well, that ritual mitzvot lead us to ethical behavior. And that's if we know we're doing the ritual stuff properly, if it makes us more sensitive to the other. So now I'm going to share this text here, because I want to look at a couple of things. So tonight we're going to look at our specific mitzvot. How do I do this? Okay. specific mitzvot, ethical mitzvot, that are very important within Judaism. And the two terms here are tzedakah and gimilut chasadim. They're very interesting terms. Tzedakah, and there's also a message to it. Well, you can see here, I think I got it here. So tzedakah comes from the root meaning righteousness or justice. The term that we would translate it into, because mostly tzedakah is understood to do with money, giving money for a good cause. And the term that we translated is charity. Charity comes from the term caritas, which means love. The difference between tzedakah and charity is that from the Jewish perspective, to give tzedakah is to right an imbalance in the world. One's obligated to do it whether or not one is emotionally connected to the need or to the recipient. Whether you want to or not, you're obligated to do it. So here's the command and the distinction between being commanded to do something or behave in an ethical way and doing it because it's a really good thing to do. And we'll see here in the most famous list of tzedakah. So of course, once we have the notion of tzedakah, Jewish codes go to, well, how do you do it? What's the right way? What's the right way to do tzedakah? And what's the best way to do tzedakah? So tzedakah, again, as I said, is usually understood as financial assistance. And we'll get to a different type of assistance in a moment with the term gimilut chasadim. So Maimonides, in his great code of Jewish law, 11th century, lived in Egypt, started in Spain, runs away to actually Israel, but the conditions in Israel are very harsh for Jews at that time, so the family moves to Egypt, and he becomes a prominent leader in the Jewish community there, and is really one of the greatest thinkers in Jewish history. Great scholar in halacha, in Jewish law, legalist, also philosopher. And in his code that he writes, his Jewish code of law, he has a section on giving tzedakah. And here's his levels of tzedakah. And you can see the first level, the lowest level, that's number 8, is donations that are given grudgingly. So even if you walk by a person on the street or somebody comes and asks for assistance and you're really angry that they're bothering you, but you give, well, it's not the nicest way to give money and help somebody, but you have performed a mitzvah. Whether you did it nicely or not, it's still the mitzvah, because again, the results are key here. The point of tzedakah is to, as we said, right an imbalance, help a person who is struggling financially. And so if you give the money and you don't want to give it and you're not happy about it, doesn't matter. You got to give it, and you've done the mitzvah. Now, a little bit better, of course, is giving, but giving less than one should. But you do so, unlike the guy who did it grudgingly, you did it, you happily gave the person, but you gave the person who's hungry on the street, you gave him a quarter. Okay, didn't really help him out that much. He's got to stay out there all day, but you did so pleasantly. Next level up is when you give directly to those who are in need when you're asked. But of course, better than that is giving directly to those in need without being asked. You know that somebody is hurting, needs the help, and you don't ask about it. You don't wait for them. You initiate the giving. Now, the next two are interesting. The next level up of level of giving is a donation when the recipient is aware of the donor's identity, but the donor doesn't know the specific identity of the recipient. Above that is a donation where the donor is aware to whom the charity is being given, but the recipient is unaware of the source. So what's the difference here? Well, in this case, it's an issue of humility, humiliation, I should say, embarrassment. Many of these tzedakah rules and teachings about how to assist others there's always a concern with the dignity of the person who's being helped. So in the case where the number 4, the recipient knows who's giving them the funds. So they're aware of somebody helping them, even though the helper doesn't know who he or she is giving to, but the recipient knows, and that may make them a little uncomfortable the next time they see them. If they're in a small community or they're at the synagogue and the recipient knows that so-and-so gave some money to help them out, they may feel a little uncomfortable, even if the donor doesn't know who the money went to. Better than that is where at least where the donor might be aware, but the recipient doesn't know who's receiving, where the money's coming from. They just know that it's being given, they're being assisted, and that's a higher level. Now, number 2 is giving assistance in such a way that the giver and recipient are unknown to each other, which is obviously what a communal fund is all about. And that's administered by responsible people, and that's in this category. So it's best when people don't know where they're receiving funds from. And it's best when the givers don't know who it's going to. So it goes into a communal pot, or there's a middle person, and they're helping, so that therefore the recipient isn't humiliated, and the giver also, there may be some discomfort in seeing the person they're helping, and certainly we don't want the giver to feel conceited about, oh, I helped so-and-so get his business off the ground. The highest form is, I'm sure you can imagine, it's true for many different community or religious teachings. Highest form of charity is to help sustain a person before they become impoverished by offering a substantial gift in a dignified manner, or by extending a suitable loan, or by helping them find employment or establish themselves in business so as to make it unnecessary for them to become dependent on others. That is the best way to help people out. Wait, I wanted to say something about, well, just a personal example. So I was in the gym once, and somebody I knew had just lost their job, factory, if it was a factory job. And I heard in the gym, I overhear this guy talking to another person about how he just lost a guy to work for his job. And it was the way he was describing the business, it was a similar type of work that this person I knew had lost the job. And it's kind of weird. I'm in my gym clothes, but I go up to the guy and I say, excuse me, I overheard, but I know somebody who's looking for a position. Can I get your phone number and they can give you a call? So they did, and it was really great. And it felt great to help this person. The end of the story wasn't so great, because what I didn't know, and of course the person who I knew who needed the job and got the job didn't know, was that this person had sold his business to some foreign company and was looking for a worker to fulfill the last 6 months before they shipped out. They still shut the company down. So it was a short-term benefit for this individual. But anyway, that was, you never know when you're going to hear something that somebody can benefit from. So that's an example of that top form of tzedakah. So again, the key here is tzedakah, righteousness. You're obligated to do it whether you want to or not. And there are different levels of giving. We could also mention that there are Jewish teachings provide guidance to, well, who do you give to? They'll say there's a lot of different needs. And the general understanding is you take care of your community first. So obviously we take care of our family. If there's somebody in the family who needs assistance, that the first obligation goes to them, to assist them. Beyond that, it's the poor in our community. Beyond that, it's the poor of our area. It could be, and then Well, actually, I guess in this case, no, the next level up besides our community would be for Jews, it would be Jewish people, around the world who are in need. And then beyond that, it's obviously anyone who needs. There's the mitzvah there's a teaching in the Talmud that when somebody comes to ask you for food, you don't ask questions. If they come to ask you for something else like clothes, they need money for clothes, then you can kind of say, well, wait a minute, why don't you, what's your situation? Um, did you go through, I don't know, the communal funds? But when they come to you for food, it doesn't matter whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, you give immediately. And that's why, so sometimes, when people are on the street asking for assistance, and I'm glad I'm mentioning this because I haven't done it for a while and I have to go buy some subway cards. I don't like to give money because I don't know, I certainly don't want to feed somebody's pathology, but you can always give, you give a food card, give a $5 Subway. That way, if they're sincere, they really need food, they'll go get the food. But when they come to the office, a lot of times people will come to the synagogue and they'll knock on the door and they'll say they need money, they need, and I say, well, for what? What do you need the funds for? Well, I need gas. My car's ran out of gas. I'm like, well, how'd you get here? If you ran out of gas, So those are, when they ask for that, then you have a right to ask questions. Really? You're driving that car, but you ran out of gas? How'd you run out of gas? How do you know? Or the car's a block away and I need a ticket to get back to Elkhart. Well, how'd you get here? So you can ask questions. That's okay when somebody asks. It's fair to ask in that situation. But if they come to the door and they say, I'm hungry, I need food, you're obligated to give in some way, and you're not supposed to start asking questions. Okay, so that's tzedakah. Now, there's another mitzvah we want to talk about here, ethical mitzvah, called ethical speech. Lashon hara is the term in Hebrew, literally evil speech. And you can see here that truth and lies, we are to keep far from dishonesty, but an awareness that honesty in some situations is more dangerous. Right? We have examples in the Torah where even God stretches the truth a little bit. When Sarah hears that she's going to have a baby and she's 90 years old, and she starts laughing and she says, my husband's so old and I stopped the way of women a long time ago. How, this is just crazy talk. Well, God goes to Abraham and he's really irritated because, this is God and God can make these miracles happen. So God says to Abraham, why did Sarah say that because she's so old, she doesn't think that she can have a baby? If I say she's going to have a baby, she's going to have a baby. Yeah, well, that's not what Sarah said, right? Sarah said, my husband's so old. But God didn't, share the exact quotation. And the understanding is that it was a ethical teaching to us. That sometimes, it's okay to fudge the truth a little bit. That's not lashon hara, right? That you're doing it in a way to protect a person or spare a person's feelings. The classic example is you're living in Germany in the 40s and there are Jews in your house or somewhere, and the Gestapo comes and says, where are the Jews? And if you're Kantian categorical imperatives, you say, oh, well, I don't really want to tell you, but they're upstairs in the attic, because lying is just bad. Lying is wrong. Judaism doesn't have that problem. Jewish teaching says, no, you lie and you save the person's life. So sometimes lies are necessary, But those are, very specialized situations. Instead, what we're taught is great is peace for its sake, well, great is peace for that's the example. Great is peace for its sake, God modifies the truth. That was the example I gave. Lashon hara, but in general, obviously, speaking truthfully is the goal. Lashon hara, though, is specifically negative speech, and it can be all types of negative speech. So it can be obviously lying about somebody. It can be saying something that's not true. It can be spreading gossip. Gossiping about others is lashon hara. But it can even be it says here, saying something negative about another, even if it is true. So you have to be, even that one has to be very careful. And many Jewish teachings suggest that it's very important. We have to be very careful when we speak of others, because even saying something true about a person, if it makes them appear negative in the eyes of others, if it lowers their esteem in the eyes of others, is considered lashon hara. The only exception might be if the information you were giving that was negative about the other person was protective to the person you were speaking to. So, because maybe from personal experience, that this financial advisor did, by acts of malfeasance, you lost a lot of money. Somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I know that you use this person as your advisor. Would you recommend them?" So in that case, you know what? I wouldn't use the person. That's different. But just to say, just to tell somebody, well, he had an affair and left, and that's why they got divorced, that is considered lashon hara. You have to be careful even about positive things. And we're warned that if you speak positively, it can sometimes lead to a negative result. So you have to be really careful. Lashon hara is one of the toughest mitzvot to follow, because basically, unless you're just never going to talk, you're always going to get tripped up in some way. So even if you say something positive, how can you say something nice about somebody and it lead to lashon hara? Well, you're in a group of people and you say, "Oh, Joe, he's at the office. Joe Schmo, he's a really nice guy." And you say it knowing that some people in the office don't like Joe Schmo. If you say, he's such a nice guy, and it leads to somebody else saying, "Yeah, but he screwed up that last report and he's an idiot," that is lashon hara. And even though you were saying something positive, by saying something in a group where there's a possibility of negativity coming out, that is also not acceptable. So you can see how difficult lashon hara is. A really tough one, hardest of the mitzvot to observe, because let's face it, even the nicest of us, the best of us, the saintliest of us, we all love gossip. We all love talking about other people. It's really hard to refrain. And I suppose my best advice is just always be conscious. Try to be as conscious as possible when we do engage in gossip. Because at least that way, maybe we'll refrain from some of the stuff that we wouldn't otherwise, if we weren't conscious, we'd be talking about. A couple of other comments, terms. Motzi shem ra is slander. So that's saying something negative that's just not true about somebody. Richilut is gossip. Comes from the root of the word rochel. A rochel is a peddler. And that's what a gossip is, right? You peddle, you bring from one person to the next, you're sharing stories. Famous story about that is the person who was saying nasty things about the rabbi in the community, and felt terrible about it after a while. He wants to do tshuva, wants to repent, and he goes to the rabbi and he says, I've been spreading these rumors about you, but I feel bad, and I want to apologize. And the rabbi said, well, I'll accept your apology if you bring me a goose feathered pillow tomorrow. And I said, what? Oh, yeah, okay. So he goes and he brings the next day, he shows up with the goose feathered pillow. And the rabbi says, come with me. And he goes outside and it's a slightly windy day, and he tears open the goose feathered pillow. Feathers go all over the place, of course. And he says, that's what you did. By spreading these stories, now they go everywhere. And you can't just come to me and apologize, because now the story's everywhere. It's all over the place. And the people that you spoke it to will speak it to other people. So it's not as simple. And that's why gossip is so hard to correct. And it's so debilitating. Okay, then we said, sharing negative information only if the information is vitally necessary. Okay, next one is Gimilut Chasadim. So Gimilut Chasadim is considered to be a greater level of helping others than tzedakah, because, well, maybe I should just follow my notes here instead of keep going off tangents. Let me explain the word of Gimilut Chasadim. It's very interesting. Ligmol is to repay somebody, and chesed is, we translate it as loving kindness, acts of compassion. Chesed is a very important word. And so here the term Gimilut Chasadim suggests a subtle meaning to it. It's not just being compassion, it's acting in a way in which you repay kindness. And what are you repaying? I mean, what's the kindness that you received? Well, because you're part of the human race, because you're part of this world that God has created, you respond out of gratitude to the good that's happened to you by doing good for others. It's a little bit like paying forward. And they're all different examples of Gimilut Chasadim. Some of them I think we're going to look at next week. But here's one of the important teachings of Gimilut Chasadim. These are the acts of which a person eats the fruit in this world, while the principle remains for that person in the world to come. And here's the example. This is part of our daily worship. We say this every morning. When we looked at the prayer book a couple weeks ago, this is the beginning Torah study for our day. Here's the things that, this list of activities: honoring parents, practice of loving deeds, early attendance at the house of study, hospitality to wayfarers, visiting the sick, attending to the needy bride, caring for the dead, meditating on prayer, bringing peace between people. Some people say between husband and wife, and Torah study is equal to them all. But this is this list of doing for others. One of the reasons why Gimilut Chasadim is considered to be a greater act of compassion, kindness than tzedakah is because Gimilut Chasadim is more encompassing. You can do Gimilut Chasadim for wealthy people. It's not only about, obviously, tzedakah, you don't need to help rich people. Gimilut Chasadim can be. People who have money are in need of compassion and loving kindness. Tzedakah is done obviously for the living. We give financial assistance to help people with difficult times. Gimilut Chasadim can be done for the dead as well. In fact, the highest form of Gimilut Chasadim is just that, is taking care of the dead, treating the dead with dignity and respect, making sure they have proper burial, because obviously you're never going to get a thank you. So doing it there, it's just pure altruism, doing it for those in need who can't repay. So now what is Gimilut Chasadim? A couple of passages here. This comes from a book that we've been learning in the morning at Minyan called Sefer Ma'alot Amidot, which is you could translate it as the book of ethical virtues. And the author, Rabbi Yechiel ben Yekutiel of Rome, lived there, I think it's a 13th century work, says, what is this? What is Gemilut Chasadim all about? And he says that, first of all, that a person should be loving and compassionate towards all creatures, because God is the ultimate merciful one. We refer to God in the 13 qualities of the divine. We recite this verse. It comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 34, where God's compassionate virtues are described or are called forth by, by the divine, but Moses is there asking God to be compassionate to the people after the golden calf incident. And this recitation of these 13 qualities, these 13 virtues of the divine. And in that, God is referred to as Chanun v'Rachum. Grace, Chen is the word grace, gracious, and loving. Very interesting. The word Rachem here comes from the same root as womb. So there's a connection between compassion, the mother's love for the child, and obviously the woman through the a womb. And so this term rachamim means love. And so God is the so when we act in a compassionate, loving way to other people, we are emulating the divine. So that's one explanation. This is a passage from the Talmud. Anyone who has compassion for God's creatures, it is known that he or she is of the descendants of Avraham, our father. And anyone who does not have compassion for God's creatures is known that they are not the descendants of Abraham, our father, because Avraham was an example of Gomel Chesed, responding compassionately to other people. What's the examples here? If they needed sustenance, he sustained them. If they needed clothing, he clothed them. Let's correct that English. He clothed them. If they needed lodging, he brought them into his home. If they needed accompaniment, he accompanied them. If they needed a loan, he would offer them a loan. If they needed to study Torah, he taught them. If they needed rebuke, he reproved them. I think this list is really interesting of what it means to be Gomel Chesed, to be loving, to express loving kindness. Obviously, some of the ones are obvious that we would think of. Well, you need funds, and so we're helpful in that way. You need clothing, lodging. These are basics. What about accompaniment? You just need somebody to be there with you. You need their presence. That's considered Gemilut Chasadim. Loan, again, is a financial gift. Study Torah is, teaching an individual. Somebody needs something. Obviously, in the world we live in today, if you tutor a kid in the public school, that's beautiful Gemilut Chasadim. And the last one, if they need rebuke. So even, and of course it has to be done very, very carefully. Rebuking is another tough mitzvah, because if the person's not ready to hear it, it's worthless. But even sometimes giving the person the tough truth that they need to hear, that is also compassionate work. So these are all examples of Gemilut Chasadim. Here's another explanation he gives, which I really like. According to the effort a person puts into doing tzedakah, which here can be maybe understood as acting rightly or acting justly, so the Holy One rewards him. This effort is what we call Gemilut Chasadim. So this example of Gemilut Chasadim, so here Gemilut Chasadim is the process of doing for others, and not only the process, but the effort expressed when we do for others. The more we, if somebody asks for a ride and they live down the block and you live a block away, okay, that's really lovely of you. If they ask for a ride and they live on the other side of town from where you live, but they don't have any other way to get home, you take them, okay, that's real Gemilut Chasadim. That's even better act of Gemilut Chasadim. Michael, you had a question?
Yeah, this last bit sounds a little peculiar to me
Yeah.
because it sounds like you should do this because, you know, the Holy One will be, in other words, you'll do it because you'll get something back from the Holy One,
Uh-huh.
as opposed to just doing it because you should, you know?
Right.
It's sort of like virtue is its own reward. Why should I, if the Holy One is not going to reward me, why should I do it? You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. A lot of times, of course, to encourage people, we, uh, that is an inducement to doing
Yeah.
good, to know that, the more, as we said above, these are, you do these acts of kindness, and they're not only are you rewarded in this world, but you get rewarded in the next world too. It's a double points. Um, on the other hand, as we mentioned before, um, you're obligated to do this stuff no matter what. Tzedakah, we said before, even if you don't want to give it, you still have to give it. And when you do it, it's still a mitzvah, even if you weren't very virtuous when you were doing it. And I think the same thing is true. We can describe here too with Gimilut Chasadim. We do Gimilut Chasadim because it's the right thing to do. Um, and or if we want to look at it at a more existential level, the fact that I'm able to breathe, the fact that I exist, that I need to express that appreciation. So I express that appreciation by doing for others. Heschel has this beautiful description. I use it a lot of times at funerals. He talks about who is the pious person, and he goes through this whole litany that we owe what we own, that the what does he say? How does he put it? The desire is to acquire, the gift is to dispense. So and that for a pious individual, they're not afraid to die because they are so grateful at the gift that they've been given, that is the gift of life, that when they have to return that gift, it's not painful to them. They have it's a proper returning this gift of life that they've been handed, that they didn't ask for, they didn't even know that was coming, and so therefore we should respond in kind. So that's why I like pointing out that Gomel Chesed is, I love the fact that Gomel means to return, to repay, because you're not really repaying anybody. I mean, what was the examples here? Clothing the naked. You're not really repaying. It's not like they gave you clothes, so you're repaying the clothes back to them. It's that you're clothing them because they need clothes. Well, so what does it mean you're repaying? Well, the idea is yeah, because I have. If we translated this into the modern idiom, it's a little bit like, when we talk, people talk about systemic racism and people having privilege. Well, it bothers me when people use that notion of privilege, like because, in my case, because my uh, father and my uncle were professionals and they were successful, then they made enough money to make it easy for me to go to college and to get out of college without debt. And obviously my skin is white. So therefore I have this privilege and I should feel bad about it. Think of all the people who didn't have that privilege. I don't think that's not a good way to deal with privilege. I think what Gomel Chesed is saying we're all privileged in some way. At the very basic, we're living. Those of us who have had a more comfortable existence because of the society we live in, the benefits that we've had, whether it's financial or the right color, or we live in the right neighborhood, or your ancestors came into the United States at the right time. These are privileges that we have, benefits, and therefore we should always be grateful for that. And therefore, because we know we have that privilege, that Gimilut Chasadim is about then paying forward, making sure that we don't take advantage of those benefits that we've been handed. Um, and was there something else I wanted to share about the? Yeah, there was another teaching, the Malot Midot. Oh, I like this one. I didn't include this in this list here, but he says, what about, basically he asked the question, well, what about a person who needs chesed? Are they obligated to repay in this way, to do acts of loving kindness? And his answer is basically, yeah, because what God looks at human beings, because it basically forces God's hand. I thought that was a really, God looks down and says, wow, these human beings who are needy and need chesed, compassion, they're doing it. They're doing it for other people. Oh my goodness, I better do for them too. So it provokes God into, compels God to do more compassionate work for us, because we've kind of embarrassed God, because we're the ones doing we should be the recipients of compassion, and yet we're sharing compassion with others. So God feels a little bit obligated to increase God's compassion towards us. So I like the fact that we make God feel a little uncomfortable the more we do, right? The more good we do. Okay, last one I wanted to look at tonight is Sa'ar Ba'alei Chaim, another act of tzedakah and gemilut chasadim, treating animals properly. This is one of the, here it is, the Noachide laws. One of the 7 laws that Jewish law understands is incumbent on all people, including non-Jews, not harming animals. And I think this, a lot of times, some in the environmental movement give the Bible a short shrift. They criticize because they read that opening chapter, and it says, God says to the human beings, you shall have dominion over all these creatures. The problem is they don't read chapter 2. Chapter 2 says that human beings are basically the gardeners and the zookeepers for this world. And even the notion, though, of having dominion over the earth doesn't mean that we're allowed to treat animals cruelly. So we have to treat animals properly. In fact, that opening story I was talking about, the importance of ethical behavior in ritual mitzvot, and the example being Rubashkin's kosher slaughter facility in Iowa, where they were treating the animals so horribly, and this was the claim against them. That is an act of Sa'ar Ba'alei Chaim. Sa'ar is suffering. So making Ba'alei Chaim is the term for animals, creatures, Chaim being life. So these are, I guess the best way to translate is living creatures. And Sa'ar is suffering. So making animals suffer is a sin. And that was the complaint, that it doesn't matter. They're saying, well, we're we're slaughtering the animals properly. What are you talking about? And the response is, yeah, but you're treating them cruelly. So what good is it? What does it matter if the knife is perfect and you slaughter the animal immediately? Before you slaughter the animal, you're acting cruelly toward it. So it wipes away all the good that you've done with following the law. So this is an important mitzvah. And again, bringing it up to date, what did I see today? I mean, I don't know. I think trees should be included in Ba'alei Chaim in some way. What did the guy running for Senate in Georgia was criticizing the EPA's new environmental rules, because don't we have enough trees already? All right. So the concern for the environment is very much a Jewish issue, and caring for animals and making sure that their habitats are protected. This is also a Jewish issue. So we can stop the share here. Okay. So I don't have any specific questions for this about today on tzedakah, gemilut chasadim. We're going to continue. I'm sending you tonight. I will send out the next the syllabus for the next two classes. I want to switch them around, and actually, I recognize I'm suggesting that you do a lot of reading in two of the books, the Telushkin's Jewish Wisdom and Sarah Hurwitz's Here All Along, especially in Telushkin's book. It is a lot of reading. He has different chapters on different topics, but they're really good, and he has wonderful sources. So whatever you can read in the section with all these sections on Gimilut Chasadim and his examples of various types of Gimilut Chasadim, well worth it. Also in that section, I didn't mark this chapter, but there is a chapter in that part of the book, that section of the book, on abortion in Jewish law, which is, a pretty important topic today, contemporary topic. So you can see what he writes about different, how different Jewish scholars have looked at the whole notion of abortion. Very different than Christianity looks at it. Anyway, so that's for next week. So next week we'll look at different types of, and it's a continuation of Gimilut Chasadim, and it's also Derech Eretz. Derech Eretz, one translation of Derech Eretz is civil behavior. So that too is something that is essential to being a Jew and important in Jewish life. And so we'll talk about that too. So anyway, anything else? Questions, specifics about these mitzvot? Okay, very good. So we'll see you next week. And I will send I'll send this out right now so you get the new list of readings for next week. Okay, have a good night. Take care.
You too. Have a good night.
Thank you.